Welcome to The Founder's Mind. This is your host, Adam Muchler. On today's episode, I have Chip Conley. Throughout his career, Chip has held many titles: founder, New York Times bestselling author, modern elder, and beyond. Chip founded, built, and sold JDV Hotels. He was recruited by Brian Chesky, founder and CEO of AirBnb, to lead their strategy and hospitality teams, and most recently has coined the term modern elder, a subject he defines and explores in his newest book, Wisdom at Work, in which Chip dives into the power of intergenerational teams. Before we dig into the episode, a quick heads up. In the next 2 weeks, you'll be hearing a lot about DC Startup Week, which kicks off on the 24th of September. A handful of guests who have been featured on The Founder's Mind will be speaking at different events, and there will be some bonus episodes and other nuggets of content dropping throughout this week and next on the show. Now to Chip Conley and the Wisdom at Work.
I'm really excited to talk to you about a little bit about your experience with JDV and Airbnb, and you've got this book obviously coming out that, I'll be honest, Chip, it really resonates with me for a lot of reasons. One of them, the Kadar Group, which is the organizational development company that I work for and in partnership with, is actually my mom's company. And I tell people regularly that my biggest strategic advantage in business is that I get to work with her and her colleagues who are from 50 to 70 and have been doing leadership development for decades. And I get to be in rooms and in conversations with them. And yeah, I tell people constantly, people ask how I got in the space, what am I excited about? And that's what I tell them. I'm excited to be in rooms with people that have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah. Well, it's that, they are in a field that actually does appreciate wisdom and does appreciate, some accumulated experience. A lot of fields don't. I mean, this is what we'll get into in the conversation, because I think more and more, especially here in Silicon Valley, there's a growing awareness that matching someone with a little bit of wisdom with someone who's brilliant as a technologist is not a bad idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, preaching to the choir, totally agree. And I was reading through parts of the book, and for me, it feels, maybe I'm biased at this point because of the work. It makes total sense, and it's what I sell clients on. I'm like, look, you're very successful. You are pursuing an incredible, concept or project or business. But people have been here before. Yeah. And people have experience that's very complementary to being energetic and innovative and sort of like no rules, let's just make it happen.
Yep.
So one of the things that I think would be helpful for listeners, and I if you Google Chip Conley, you'll find lots of videos and lots of lots of sort of things already written about you. But in your own words, a little bit about what got you into this sort of founder story, because when you look at your LinkedIn, founder shows up several times. So it'd just be good to hear from you.
Sure. How did I find myself being a founder?
Yeah.
The thing about finding, the word founder is a fascinating thing, as is the word calling.
Yeah.
Calling is almost like, did you find the phone? Here I am. I'm in a room right now, and I've got a phone over here. Like, did I find the damn phone when the call came in? And I think being a calling is a lot like being a founder. When someone is in the space where there's something incubating inside of them.
Yeah,
it's almost like being impregnated with an idea or with something fresh. The idea of jumping on that founder's mind responsibility to be true to what it is that has been is incubating inside of you is an enormous responsibility. And it's not just because of, okay, you're raising money and you have responsibility to the investors, or you have employees you're hiring.
Yeah.
No, there's a responsibility to the idea.
Yeah.
There's Steve Jobs used to say that ideas are fragile and therefore they need to be incubated. And there's an element of the founder idea that's a fresh, new, naive, early life kind of entity.
Yeah.
And I think that element of being the founder who helps to not, breastfeed the baby and helps that founding idea find its ground and be able to grow into something is one of the more beautiful times of any new organization. And I've been a founder of Joie de Vivre Hospitality, became the second largest boutique hotel company in the US. And I was not a founder at Airbnb, but I would basically have been side by side with the three founders for the last 5.5 years.
Yeah.
But I was founder of something called Fest 300, which is the world's, Fest 300 is now merged with Everfest, and it's the largest festival discovery site in the world. I'm now the founder of something called the Modern Elder Academy. I love getting impregnated, and that sounds very strange for men to say. But I love the idea that something somehow has gotten lodged in me, in my spirit, in my body, in my mind, that my role is to help incubate it and care for it in such a way that it actually turns into something more than just an idea.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the way that you phrased it and sort of the analogies that you used around this idea of an idea incubating. And it was just had a conversation earlier today around this idea of founders are stewards of ideas and bringing an idea into reality. Mm-hmm. And there's a transition from being a founder to being an executive, but this idea of the founder really being this like nurturing sort of role of getting something out there.
Yeah, that is very much what it is. And then it's to find the people you're going to be, surrounding this idea with. I mean, if you think of the idea as like a small child, it's almost like this collection of people, a small family, is around that child. And of course, the child's screaming. That idea is screaming for attention, and it needs to be nurtured. It needs to actually be fed. And then the question is, once it actually gets to a place where it starts to actually take on its own life, it can stand up and walk. And then, frankly, then it's all of a sudden been taken to the place where it's actually growing into something that's beyond just this little tiny baby.
Yeah. I'm always curious, and listening to you talk about how an idea comes to you, what's that transition from the idea to this pull into doing it, or that tipping point into this, there's this thought in me, or it's percolating and I want to dive into it, whether it's, Joie de Vivre or even making that transition into Airbnb.
Yeah. It's so important to be able to have attention to serendipity. Mm-hmm. Serendipity is almost like some magical angel that's tapping you on the shoulder and asking you to take notice of the little breadcrumbs that are being put out there for you to follow. And so I think for me, it's a combination of what's showing up in my life and in my dreams. Sometimes it's actually my dreams. Or if I like running on the beach. And when I'm running on the beach, I have these wild downloads from the consciousness of the world, just saying, yes, this and this. And I get all these ideas. And when it's in that percolating style of how it's happening to me, I have to take notice of that. And then sometimes it's even just other people talking about something. It's like, when I decided to create a boutique hotel company, boutique hotels in the US, there were like 5 of them. It was an idea that really hadn't gotten off the ground very much yet in the mid 1980s. But I kept having people sleep on my couch at my tiny little apartment in San Francisco. And so I would ask them, so why aren't you staying in a hotel? Of course I was saying yes, that they could stay there. And what I kept hearing was the same old thing over and over again. I was like, all the hotels in San Francisco are too expensive and really boring. And so, my premise then in the mid 1980s was, okay, let's create a cool, affordable boutique hotel so I don't have people on my couch all the time.
Yeah.
But I think the element of just being able to sort of see what is serendipity is sort of serving you, but also then starting to imagine the practicality of the business and what is it, who's the business serving, and how are you creating something that is addressing more than just an expectation or a desire, but it's almost an unrecognized need of the customer?
Yeah. There are a couple things that came up. One, and I think similarly to you, when the universe winks, are you watching? Or are you listening?
Exactly.
Which is actually how this podcast started. I came up with the name, and I do this thing where I type in a name to this website that searches the internet for all social handles and websites, and it tells you if it's available or not. And the Founder's Mind was available everywhere.com, all the social handles. And I was like, I feel like that's a wink,
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing that you were talking about with the boutique hotels in the 80s, I couldn't help but sort of hear some of Brian's story about, starting Airbnb and starting with, just, having people over and saying, oh, this is a thing that works and thing that people will do and enjoy.
Yeah, it's such a joy for me to hear Brian and Joe's story because they were exactly the same age I was when they started their company. So I was now 52 when they were telling me the story, but they were 26 when they started their company. And 5 years later, at 31, I joined them. And so their story was very much, they needed to pay the rent, and there was a design conference in town, and all the hotels were sold out. And so they marketed online the fact that they actually had a living room with 3 air mattresses that were going to be in there. And so that's how Airbnb as a company, the name came from air mattress bed and breakfast.
Yeah.
So, and they thought that their whole idea about how big Airbnb could be ultimately was how many air mattresses are there in the United States. And of course, Airbnb is a lot bigger than that. It's not just
dramatically.
Yeah. So, listening to people in their founding stories, and what was it? Listening to Reed Hastings, this founding story of Netflix, and it was just the frustration of heading to the athletic club or the health club and having to return a Blockbuster video and pay $40. He had to pay more for the week of late fees than he would have actually just to buy the damn thing.
Yeah.
And then he was driving to the health club and was like, wow, you know what? I pay a monthly membership for the health club. Why can't I pay a monthly membership for my movies?
Yeah.
And, it's just, there's an element of serendipity in so much of the ideas and stories that have, become some of our biggest companies.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that I find fascinating, and I think about when I work with clients, is there's an element of, if you really tap into what makes us human, intuition, creativity, being intellectual, if you really focus and tap into that, you start to hear and see more things. But a lot of what we're experiencing in today's world and in 2018 is taking us away from our humanity, whether it's being too plugged in, distracted by notifications. I mean, you name it. I'm in a generation that's one generation away from completely digital. I would say 15 and under wasn't very digital for me. But after, once I was in high school, and the technology started to really take off, I essentially have had an entire adulthood in the digital world.
Yep.
But when I'm working with people, there's this really big disconnect in, are you listening to what's going on inside of you? Are you listening to the cues and the clues? So I just love hearing you talk about that in your story, and even, referencing other stories.
Yes.
What are some pieces of advice that you received early in your journey that really stand out even today?
One thing that Richard Branson said to me, and it sounds like I'm name dropping. I sort of am, I guess, but he wrote the foreword for my first book, and early on I was able to get to know him because Virgin had an airline, and the airline and the hotels sometimes have relationships, and there was no Virgin Hotels at that point yet. And so he said the following. He said, when he's creating a new business, if he's a founder, the mantra he has in his head is, I am the market. I am the market. I am the market. And what he means by that is create a product that's going to absolutely knock your socks off. Now, some people would say that's bad advice because, no one needs a market of one. No, what's good for Richard may not be good for a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
So take this with a grain of salt. I think that there's an element from his perspective that he doesn't need to actually satisfy his own needs only. I mean, he's open to satisfying other people as well. The bottom line is you want to create a product that absolutely, completely takes your breath away.
Yeah.
And that's a high standard.
Yeah.
And it also means there may be practical businesses you could go in where there's a big market for it. But if it doesn't get you passionate about it, then, maybe let somebody else do that. So I think the idea that you're focused on markets and products and services that you're going to fall in love with is wise.
Yeah. There's just so much, it's so many parallels. And I find myself with guests saying yes a lot because I'm talking to people who I agree with, but also sharing really great insights. And something that comes up in the coaching work is if you're not passionate about it, like you're saying, if you can't dig your teeth into it, almost like a pit bull and not let go, you're going to let go. You're going to give up at some point because there's an element of being a founder, and not to educate you on this, where the tenacity and the resilience and the grit that you need to get through the insanity that is trying to build something from nothing is massive.
Yeah.
And that passion has to be there, like you said. I don't know. I want to know more about the book.
Okay.
And I think what I'm excited about is people listening to this who might not have the book on their radar or who are a little bit, a younger tilt, like myself. And I know there's a lot to take out of what you're sharing and sort of the perspective that you're really amplifying. And I love the name Modern Elder, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, some people like it, some people don't. Let me give you some background, if that's okay.
Of course, please.
Adam? So I'd sold my boutique hotel company, Joie de Vivre, around age 50. And I wasn't sure what was next for me. There's a great Robert De Niro quote from the movie The Intern. He says, musicians don't retire. They quit when there's no more music left inside of them.
Yeah.
And I know I had a lot of music left inside of me, but I just wasn't sure who to share it with. And when I was 52, I got a call from Brian Chesky, who is the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb. He asked me if I wanted to help him democratize hospitality, which is, a bold statement. And I liked that and spent some time with him, was really impressed. He had me come and give a talk at his company. His company at that point had 300 to 400 employees. We're actually 10 times that size now. This was 5.5 years ago. And there was not one person in the company with a hospitality or travel industry background.
Yeah.
So he said, Chip, I want you to be the head of global hospitality and strategy. I want you to be my mentor. All of that sounded great. And yet what I hadn't really realized at first until I showed up for my first day was I was twice the age of the average employee there. And I had no experience in the tech industry at all. And I'd be reporting to, even though I was his mentor, I'd be also reporting to Brian, who's 21 years younger than me. And I'd just spent the last 24 years running a company from one person. And we grew it to 3,500 employees. And I'd been the CEO the whole time, but now I was going to be reporting to Brian. So it took a lot for me to really shift myself. And I think this is relevant for anybody, that piece of like going into a new habitat and having to evolve yourself, evolve your identity in a certain way to make it in a new habitat. I had to do it as someone in midlife who had no tech experience, but you could do it, by moving to a different culture. You could moving to a different industry, or being demographically in a group of people, a woman amongst only men in a company or something like that, where you have to really almost be a cultural anthropologist. And for me, my anthropology was like understanding millennials, because not to say I wasn't very good at that. My world has been full of millennials, but not in a workplace where I was not the CEO. And so I think the best lesson I got out of this was the traditional elder of the past was a wisdom dispenser. Like they just gave wisdom, and it was usually advice or, answers and thoughts. And I think the modern elder today is as much of an intern as they are a mentor, because the world's changing so quickly, faster than any time in the history of man, that there's an element of, if you're just the traditional elder dispensing wisdom, it doesn't have a context sometimes for the people to actually understand it. So for me, being able to be the wise elder at Airbnb, when it came to emotional intelligence and leadership and strategy and hospitality, for sure. But when it came to technology, I was the dumbest person in the room. So I interned publicly and I mentored privately.
Yeah.
So I was
seen that in a couple talks.
Yeah, I was open to just saying, I am here to be the most curious person in the room. And sometimes my catalytic curiosity helped us to see a blind spot we wouldn't have seen otherwise. So I think, I wasn't necessarily trying to be the know-it-all. And I think there's a certain liberation when you actually aren't trying to pretend to know it all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's said, I think, many times by many executives, and it sort of proves out in reality. But if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And one of the things that comes up in conversations with founders that are sort of looking more at this executive role is, look, your job is to hire people that know significantly more than you in many areas so that they can help build the vision. As a lifelong learner and as someone who likes to be a beginner, a question that I forget where I heard it, but I loved it, is what's something that you learned recently that blew your mind?
Let's see. Let me think about which of the things. Well, I mean, truthfully, I'll just tell you something I'm learning. I'm learning to surf.
Nice.
So I'm learning to surf. I'm 57 years old. I'm learning to surf, and I'm a pretty good athlete, but surfing is really hard. The thing I think I've learned, and this sort of relates to the surfing story, is I've spent my lifetime mostly attaining in the attainment mode. And when you're surfing, you have to be in the attunement mode. Yoga is an attunement mode. When you try to attain yoga, you get frustrated. So the difference between attainment and attunement is the difference between ultimately having to atone for something or being at one with something.
Yeah.
And I think that idea that learning how to attune and knowing when it is best to attune and when is it best to attain, as opposed to sort of taking the full perspective that everything I do in life is all attainment based.
Yeah.
Or similarly, we know people who are just naturally attuners. And when they're attuners, that just sort of means they always fit in and they're a helper and they get along. But if you ever ask them what they really feel, like they don't have a clue because they're attuning themselves with their surroundings. So I think what I'm saying is, I think we all can use a certain alchemy and mix of attainment and attunement. And the question is, how do you, if you're an attainer by nature, how can you actually go out and learn how to attune a little bit more? I promise you, learning to surf is one of those ways that I'm learning to attune.
It may be a little humbling also.
Yeah, for sure.
When you were saying attain and attune and talking about some of the things we've discussed, would you say attain knowledge, attune to wisdom? Is it like in that?
Yeah, that's
in that
good.
realm?
I like that. There's also the great quote of, knowledge speaks and wisdom listens.
Yeah.
I was in Utah this weekend with the Summit Series folks and giving a talk on wisdom. And just before I went on stage, here's this guy with an eagle owl. I never knew there was an eagle owl. There's an eagle owl on his arm. And so I asked him, he specializes in creating sanctuaries for birds. I said, so what is it that makes an owl wise? I'm about to go give a talk on stage, and we think of the wise old owl.
Yeah.
And he said, the thing about owls is they're the best listeners of birds in the forest. They have the most attuned listening. So if for those of us who are thinking, okay, I want to be more wise, just keep remembering, knowledge speaks, wisdom listens.
Yeah. I come from the coaching space, so I can tell you that listening is a very, very, very powerful place to be.
Exactly.
Chip.
Yes.
This was really, really good. I really appreciate having you on the Founder's Mind.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a blast. Tell me how I can keep in touch with you, and how can your listeners keep in touch with me? That's
Well, that's my closing question: is what can people do to follow you, to find you, to keep even from afar absorbing this wisdom that you're acquiring and really sharing, which is a big piece. It's it's not just listening and holding it to yourself, but trying to put some of that back out there. So what's a great way for people to follow you?
So people can go to chipconley.com, and Conley spelled Conley. And there you'll actually learn about the book, but you'll also learn about the Modern Elder Academy, which is a new program that we've put in place on a beachfront campus in Mexico, in Baja. And, you can follow me. The place where I tend to write a lot, and so people want to get inside my head beyond just the book, is on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile has a lot of information of articles that I've written. And just feel free to reach, right out. You can reach out to me as well on any social media platform. I don't have a bunch of people doing my social media. I tend to do it myself.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Founder's Mind. Check back later this week for a tangent episode where Chip and I discuss being a beginner, the importance of saying, I don't know, and more. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, keep your ears peeled for additional bonus content and full episodes in the next couple weeks, highlighting previous guests of The Founder's Mind and some new ones who will be speaking and participating in DC Startup Week, which kicks off September 24th. To make sure you don't miss any awesome wisdom from guests and stay up to date on the most recent episodes of the show, be sure to visit thefoundersmind.com. You can also follow along on social at The Founder's Mind. If you like what you're hearing on the show, take a moment to rate and review. And a little bonus, if you leave your social handle in the review, I'll be sure to give you a shout out on the Founder's Mind social channels. Until next time, take care.
In the world, going through all of this insanity, and try to bring new ideas, make them a reality. Illuminate in the thoughts, make it a priority to implement what you learn. What you get is what you be. In a world full of noise, hard to find that clarity to try to lead subtly, never full of vanity, and try to change something small or try to change humanity. Power forward through the dark. Founder's mind is what you see. Founder's mind is what you see.